Well, here we go. I don't even know where to begin. It's been over 20 years, and everything I'm about to share is, well, really strange. But the pressure's been building up for too long. I need to tell my story, and my brother Gail's story. How we've been deceived, manipulated, pursued, and threatened all these years. This isn't science fiction. This is real. The truth is, I'm scared. I've been on the run for over a week, and it's been longer than that since I last heard from Gail. At this point, the consequences don't matter anymore, even if it costs me my life. The world needs to know, so I'm going to share every detail. It all started on March 13th, 1997. Gail and I are engineers by trade, though back then, we were just young engineering students. We were tech fanatics and pranksters, really reckless to be honest. One day, we decided to take on a project to develop some new technology. Today, it's easy to explain it as a kind of drone. But back then, we were building prototypes close to what a drone is now, using whatever limited budget and knowledge we had. The idea was to fly them a few miles for a short duration, maybe around 30 minutes. Through radio transmissions, we'd intercept military training exercises around Phoenix, usually just before they began. The Barry Goldwater Range Air Force Base often had strange-looking planes flying in the area. We assumed they were testing new technology during those practice hours. We'd get as close as we could to those areas to watch the nighttime maneuvers, almost skirting the law, just for the thrill of seeing those unusual planes in the sky. Our plan was to launch our drone prototypes together to see if we could trigger a reaction from the military. The thought of the planes coming after our low-budget prototypes gave us a wild thrill. So, that night, we decided to risk it. It was 7:30 p.m. We stationed ourselves in the middle of the desert, a good distance from the base, in case we needed to make a quick escape. Around that time, we saw a series of planes take off. We watched them perform several impressive maneuvers for about 20 minutes until they finally launched flares into the sky. A burst of them lit up the night. Thinking they were wrapping up, we rushed to prepare our 3 drones. We unloaded the equipment from the back of our pickup truck and started our operation. Within minutes, our 3 drones reached a decent altitude, though they were still low enough to stay unnoticed, so we pushed them higher until they blended with the flares, becoming 3 more lights drifting across the sky. It was one of our greatest moments. Absolutely thrilling. But soon enough, we started having trouble with the wind. The drones moved erratically in directions and at speeds different from the flares, making the scene chaotic, even for us. By then, we were certain someone at the base had spotted us, and the response was immediate. Gail and I were so invested in seeing our prototypes mingling with the lights that we missed the convoy of black trucks with police lights speeding toward us in the distance. By the time we noticed, it was too late. Gail shoved me, pointing toward the trucks closing in. I hadn't even opened my mouth before Gail leaped into the truck cab yelling, "Let's go, now!" I was too slow. I dropped the drone controller without a second thought. I barely had time to get in before Gail floored the gas, but we barely made it to the main road before 7 government trucks boxed us in. We stopped before they started shooting. What happened next was wild, chaotic. I only have fragments. I remember the rough handling as they transported us, handcuffed and blindfolded, with men in suits throwing us into the trucks. It was clear by then we were in CIA hands. They took us to a building where we were hauled into an interrogation room and chained to chairs. Agents came in and out, grilling us about who we were working for, how we got the technology, and what we were after, while showing us personal records, our school grades, family photos, even medical records. They had everything. Then they brought us to a government lab, making us explain step by step how we'd built the drones. They'd clearly shot them down. One of them lay on a table, still intact. We were surrounded by military engineers and tech developers, always under guard. One scientist seemed stunned, asking repeatedly, "You two built this yourselves?" We had actually impressed them. We heard phrases like, "This is too advanced for two young engineers," floating around us. Finally, we were taken to a conference room where high-ranking officials from the military, CIA, and Department of Defense were waiting. That last moment sticks out most clearly. After 3 days of interrogation, they finally offered us jobs. They'd realized we were just two young engineers with a taste for mischief. We had no criminal records, and our family was really like any middle-class family in Phoenix, very low profile. They put a non-disclosure agreement in front of us with an empty line for our signatures. I nearly jumped to sign it, but Gale stopped me. He was scanning the fine print and then suddenly exploded. He shouted, "You bastards! They want to use us as hostages. I want my lawyer." I didn't understand what he meant, so I started reading carefully. Of course, the contract included, as expected, a confidentiality clause that would severely limit our lives, especially in terms of sharing information. I understood that we'd be working on highly sensitive classified projects. From that moment on, privacy was out of the question. All our equipment would be monitored by the government, and we couldn't disclose anything about our roles, the places we'd work, or even what our jobs entailed. They'd even fabricated a company with fake offices for us to reference if anyone asked. Two young engineers supposedly working in cell phone development for a growing corporation. Gale eventually calmed down. They left us alone with the documents to talk, knowing full well they could hear everything. I told Gale we had no choice. We had to accept. It was our only option, and he saw that too once he cooled off. We signed, sealing the consequences of our actions. At first, the adaptation was slow. They assigned us basic projects, completely unrelated to the situation. Maybe it was a test, or maybe they didn't fully trust a couple of rogue engineers who'd almost caused a government scandal. In fact, after everything that happened, we saw news reports about the sighting of our drones alongside the flares. The public believed they had witnessed extraterrestrial UFOs, which surprised us, especially since the government's attempts to dismiss it were weak. But everything would make sense later. After working in what were practically abandoned offices for nearly 5 years at the Barry Goldwater Air Force Base, isolated and just reviewing prototypes, Gale and I had lost any trace of excitement we once felt working with unknown technology. But finally, on one of the dullest days, a team of specialists came to visit. They introduced themselves simply as Project Blue Lights. None of them had names. Their IDs showed only a photo and a generic number. We were at our workbench, and when we suggested moving to a more comfortable space, they ignored us entirely. There was a man and a woman, eerily alike, as though they could have been siblings or clones. They placed a briefcase on the bench, opened it, and handed us 2 IDs with our faces and a number below each. Above the photos, it read only, Project Blue Lights. With little enthusiasm, the woman said, "Welcome to Project Blue Lights." They started explaining something about a place called Area 51, eventually taking us there to show us what would become our new workplace. We drove for hours. I could feel the uneven terrain beneath us, so I guessed we were in the desert. I say this because we were blindfolded the entire trip to keep the location of this ultra-secret facility hidden. They explained that from then on, it would be not just our workplace, but also our home. After spending 5 years practically in secrecy, things were about to get even more intense. I could hear Gail breathing beside me in the back of the truck while they droned on about access protocols, security, restrictions, everything that would confine us. We had literally become prisoners of this project. They even mentioned that Project Blue Lights had been in development for years and would likely be years more before it could be executed. Until then, Gail and I were to continue working on technological developments. It had to be something far beyond what we were capable of. When we arrived at the Area 51 facility, they kept us blindfolded until we were fully inside. After passing through some kind of gateway, I knew we'd arrived because everything became eerily silent. We couldn't hear a single sound from outside, as if we'd entered an airtight Tupperware container. When they finally removed our blindfolds, we found ourselves in a massive bunker, rustic yet modern at the same time. It was hard to describe. It was clearly built to withstand any kind of disaster or breach, yet the atmosphere was sophisticated and high-tech. We entered an elevator where both agents had to scan their IDs to descend. I have no idea how far we went down, but it was a long way because the temperature kept dropping. One warning they gave us was that we could never be alone. Operating the elevator required 2 people for security reasons. When we reached the basement floor, we stepped into a vast science lab. They explained that several projects were in development, and we were there to work on propulsion systems, just as we'd managed with our drones. That's why we'd been brought there. They showed us blueprints and flooded us with so much information we could barely keep up. And so, we began the nightmare that would change our lives forever. We spent over 10 years creating various prototypes, though the final objective was never made clear. We were developing an army of drones, working on the challenge of controlling them simultaneously, making them independent from one another, and equipping them with elaborate lights. Each time we aimed to make them larger but lighter. We conducted countless simulations. I don't remember the exact day, but in December 2012 they gathered everyone in Project Blue Lights. By then, the team had grown from just 10 people to at least 20. In a large room with a projector, they explained that we'd be conducting one of the most ambitious simulations yet to test our progress. They showed us maps of strategic government locations across the U.S., ending with the most important, the White House. They told us we needed to be ready to defend the nation, so we would simulate an attack on the White House. The truth is, the simulation was a disaster. We couldn't coordinate the drones to defend against a hypothetical attack. It took place in a large warehouse with a replica of the White House, and we failed. The tension was intense. I felt enormous pressure to make it work, and we knew it would take far more time than we had anticipated. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't until 2024, 12 years later, that we attempted new simulations, but by then, everything looked very different. Of course, we were no longer young. We'd spent our lives on this project. Many people had come and gone, disappearing without a trace, while new faces joined. We were no longer talking about scenarios within the U.S. The project had expanded far beyond our borders. They spoke of allied countries collaborating from outside. I remember being there the day they announced the plan. November 1st, 2024, Area 51, Hawk's Room. In all the years with Project Blue Lights, we'd only entered the Hawk's Room twice. It was where critical strategies were planned before execution. A striking amphitheater-shaped room with massive screens at the front. When we entered, we noticed at least 8 representatives from different countries attending remotely. Each screen displayed the name of the country represented. An agent from the Department of Defense entered the room, walked up to the podium, greeted everyone, and, without much preamble, began explaining why we were there.
After years of work on Project Blue Lights, the time has come to bring this technology to life. Together with the CIA and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, we've developed it to perfection. We don't need more simulations. The time has come to execute our master plan, a global extraterrestrial invasion.
I heard those words and felt dizzy. I looked over at Gale, whose face had gone pale. Being impulsive, he shot up from his seat, yelling, "Wait a minute, this isn't what we've been working on." Instantly, everyone turned to him. I motioned for him to sit down, but it was impossible. He was livid, shouting, "You bastards, you used us!" Within seconds, a group of guards had dragged him out. I held myself back to avoid the same fate, but I was sickened. We had been used, manipulated, for an end we never saw coming. I stayed to hear the rest of the plan. A staged extraterrestrial invasion to control the world population, the culmination of years of technological advancements, all designed to bring about world domination through a single government. The execution date for Project Blue Lights was in 15 days, and I knew I couldn't be there when it happened. My mind kept flashing back to the night that changed everything. That night of March 13th, 1997. I thought of Gale. Was he still alive? What had they done to him? How could I help him without being caught myself? My head was spinning, but I knew I had to act fast. That night, I asked the driver taking me back to my residence to stop at a gas station so I could buy cigarettes. It wasn't a regular habit, but I'd done it a few times before. He got out to use the bathroom, and as soon as he went inside, I didn't hesitate. Driven by pure instinct, I slipped away from the gas station and started running into the desert. There was no clear direction, just the need to survive and keep moving. That's what I did. Through hitchhiking, I managed to make it from Alamo to Sedona within a day. And here I am, on the run, in hiding, terrified of what they'll do if they find me, but compelled to share the truth of what Gale and I have endured for over 20 years. I still don't know if he's alive. I have to avoid all contact with devices or people who could give away my location. My original plan was to return to Phoenix, where Gale and I grew up. But now, I think I'll have to accept a life in hiding, a fugitive with a terrifying secret. No one can comprehend the lengths these people will go to with the power they hold. That's why I'm sending this message. It must be shared and spread. Today is November 15th, the day Project Blue Lights is set to launch. The world and humanity are in danger. Life as we know it is about to change forever, and we must do something to stop it.